Welcome back. I've got Bruce Piasecki on the line. Bruce, how are you?
Very fine, Michael. Glad that
Good.
you're here.
I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm glad you're here too. We've talked quite a bit in the pre-show, which we'll sprinkle into the episode as well. But you do some amazing work, and you're concerned about a lot of different things that impacts humanity. But one of the things that we discussed in the pre-show was the connection of fear of war and fear of climate change and how they intersect a lot more than people may think. So, would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, like yesterday, I did a podcast with Colonel Robin Phillips, who ran for the national security at the Pentagon, both the Afghanistan desk, the South Asian desk of those 41 nations like India and Pakistan, and also ran for 10 years the desk. They always gave her the hotspots of the former nations of the Soviet Union when it was breaking up. And what Colonel Robbins says, because she's honored me with a great review of my book, Wealth and Climate Competitiveness on Amazon, she's noticed as well that there's this coincidence between the new concerns about war and military resource conflict and climate change. And she reminds all of us in this podcast I did with her that today, for the first time in human history, we have the technology and the information, but we have to choose the right leaders and adapt the right patterns to realize that these are one and the same, that unless you keep national security interests and nation state interests in Somalia or the other nearly failed states, you're going to create serious unrest for the US government and for Canada and for the industrialized nations. So I believe that they're one and the same. So I'd like your listeners to begin to visualize the solution. And I call it the sweet spot between business and society. If you think of two large circles, one is business interests and another is social interests. For the longest time, those two circles only met mildly, peripherally, when they bumped into each other. Now what I'm finding in the new generation, my daughter's a doctor and she's totally there. There is a sweet spot of innovation and wealth creation where the two circles meet, and they meet in 6 ways. First, they cut costs. When Walmart hired my firm, it was always the low price. They wanted to bring food into Africa with less cost, but it really is a sustainability and climate solution if you can give people nutrition in Africa in 22 nations without or over reliance on yams, right? Because it's not diverse enough. Second, the great firms grow revenue. So in my new book, I talk about Trane Technologies, the building science and the food transportation giant, 50,000 engineers who quadrupled the value of their stock during the pandemic because they found a more efficient way to help Pfizer shift its pandemic vaccines, helped Walmart ship its refrigerated food. And so Trane Technologies is featured in my new book as an example of a business result. They're growing revenue because they're interacting with social needs. I think the third thing that happens is we begin to improve our relationships against the common prejudices. So many corporate leaders that I worked for, say 20 years ago, in their high rises where we take the private elevator up to the top of the firm, they had prejudices about social movements. They had prejudices against government, right? And I think that when you begin to think of the sweet spot that's shared between business interests and social interests, you get firms like Toyota, Patagonia, Unilever that operate. Unilever operates in 120 to 140 of the 190 nations of the world. And they see that in the attitude of most people that buy their products, there is this sharing of the sweet spot. The other 3 things that I worked on in my firm with our lawyers and our engineers is that you attract and retain better talent by thinking about the sweet spot. And that's clearly evident in firms like Trane, where I write about a man called Scott Tu, who's taken my company's leadership training for 15 years, twice a year, and as a result is one of their managing partners. I also think that you strengthen the brand, and too often the environmental movement is distracted by that. There's only saying it's greenwash, right? But it does actually, when a Toyota makes a hybrid powertrain car that goes twice as far at the same cost, you're improving the brand of Toyota in contrast to the gas guzzlers. Now, I'm not willing to say that we won the battle at Toyota because it was at the same time trucks were very dominant. So although we launched 8 million hybrid powertrain cars, the Prius and onward, we didn't change the entire market. But the sixth and last thing it does is it reduces risk, right? So all those financial concerns about capital exposure. So cut costs, grow revenue, reduce risk, strengthen brand, improve social relationships, and attract talent. That's what we focused our company on for 40 years.
And you recognized early on, how intertwined everything is. And when you get all of those pillars, as I like to look at them, working together, you create this system and this organization that it's doing amazing work. It's addressing needs. It's fulfilling. It's an organization. You go in there and like, okay, what you have this opportunity to be creative because you're bringing in the best talent because you're doing creative things to make a positive impact on the world, improving profitability. You can have both worlds or all worlds.
I think you
And
made a key point, Mike, so I'd like to build on it. I was trained as a classical financial literacy person, but you're talking about how in today's generation and most people find satisfaction in purpose. And purpose at a firm is doing what you exactly described. So I go back in my work, my New York Times bestseller is called Doing More with Less, where I discovered this by writing about Ben Franklin. If you think about that American guy 300 years ago, he's neither Republican nor Democrat. He is creative in his force, and he thinks about social capital, not just financial literacy like I did. So, for example, he thinks about the bifocal because he notices he needs a bifocal to read better. It's self-interest, but he made it available to the people of Philadelphia. He's tired of moving his cart to the print shop through mud, so he helps the Public Works Department invent sidewalks. Once again, self-interest, but Philly becomes a mega place in America, early days, because of that. He's curious about lightning because he loves to swim and he's afraid, is this thing going to come down? So he thinks of the lightning rod. He's curious about efficiency, so he invents the Franklin stove, right? So in my work, I'm looking to liberate social capital in these firms, not just financial capital.
and it benefits both. And we know when we analyze, and I've talked with people that do this for a living, the different generations and their motivators and what they want to bring to the table. And Gen Z, and we'll see what Gen Alpha comes up with, and the millennials. There's variances, but they want to do amazing work, but they want it to have a meaning to it because they get fulfilled from it. And not, obviously, the financial aspect of being compensated is a component of it. But I learned a long, long time ago, you can give your team raises, but they'll forget about it in a
They
short
want
order.
purpose. Yeah,
Yeah.
they view their, so this is really where these new books of mine go. We want to create a competitive spirit in people in their relationship to their family and their friends and their firms, but that it be based on creative force rather than destructive, litigious force. So let me say this, I've come to conclude after running a capitalist organization for 40 years. Now, I'm happy to say, Michael, I could speak more freely about it because after having worked for a fifth of the Fortune 500, I haven't worked for these giants for the last 2 years. It was 41 years and now I'm retired. I do run a leadership workshop that's financed by some of these firms. But the fundamental of my newest book is that capitalism can become social response capitalism if it's about the smart realignment of money, people, and rules. Without a doubt, you made reference just now to how the people in a firm you learned want to be purposeful. So you have to realign for that, right? I use in a new piece I wrote for the American Association of Colleges, my daughter as an example. So my daughter's 28 years old. She's now a doctor in rehabilitation, brain and spinal injury. And I'm very proud of her. So is my wife. And I think she's a doctor more because of the diligence of my wife than a bookish person like me. But to make a long story short, when I observed Colette and all of her doctor friends at Upstate Medical and all of the places in the hospitals she's now working at, it's almost they learned about the relationship to business and society osmotically. They didn't have to be told about it in graduate school, or they didn't have to be forced into it by policy. They live in a world in where there's so many people in the population, and they already are discerning that they have to play a role in reducing climate and pollution and making machines more efficient. To them, so I wrote about this in a piece about the beauty of global education, because she learned it osmotically. She didn't learn it by becoming a master's of environmental management. She learned it through medical school by bouncing across other intelligent, service-oriented people from around the world. So I've come to conclude that we are in a race to save the environment and save the planet, but I'm of the school that we're getting there. After 41 years of practice, I feel, Michael, we're getting there.
Yeah, and I think, the competitive spirit of, we'll use racing, for example, but yes, we're all competing, but we're all competing together because we have a same goal. And being open, and you mentioned, your daughter, and observing, and in conversations with people all over the globe, you get different perspectives, and that shows to me, not knowing her at all, that she is, open-minded, curious, exploratory, wanting to see different things instead of getting into a rut, for example, and just saying this is the only way that we can do it, when we know there's, countless ways that we can approach things. But I think that it speaks volumes to her, and the role that
Her
you,
colleagues, there were hundreds like her in medical school. That's
yeah,
what blew me away. When I was pre-med 45 years ago at Cornell, it was all about becoming a doctor and focusing in your office and not about all these social issues. I think you hit the nail on the head again, that I've been curious. The word curiosity is also related to the word creative force. Now that I sold my corporation 3 years ago, my wife and I created a foundation where we give awards to under 40-year-olds that are writing about business and society. We've given many out now, and they're awarded at the New York State Writers Institute in front of 500 other authors. And we decided to call it Creative Force Foundation, because there is a difference between selfish, self-aggrandizing, competitive force, where you always feel like you have to win, and creative force, where you're watching the currents move in the direction of social needs. And so I don't believe that there will always be, Michael, speculative capitalists who are trying to get the 40% yield in two years, right? But my work is about the giants and the mid-sized firms and the leaders that are advancing history. They're almost like surfing at the top of the wave, as opposed to falling into the wave. So I do think that my new book, Wealth and Climate Competitiveness, constructs a new narrative that, so I want to talk about one of the concepts in the book as well. I've already mentioned to you, Michael, that money, people, and rules is the way we capitalists organize our staffs and the way we compete, often in a cooperative way, right, through partnerships, right? But I think the thing that I found myself surprising myself, Michael, in writing this new book, is I tried to think, what kind of 700-year-old tale exists out there that's going to prepare people of all different generations to think this way that we're talking about more easily. And I decided there's a whole chapter, a whole passage in the end of the book about Robin Hood and redistribution of wealth. Now, if you begin to think about Robin Hood, he's really celebrated in the British tales across the last 700 years as a social hero, as opposed to a criminal. You know, it's taken society a while to accept the notion that a Nelson Mandela was heroic rather than a person in prison in South Africa. And so in the book, I write about why redistribution of wealth is a social good. I'm not talking about overtaxing the rich or draconian rules. I'm just talking about how there's things happening in the investment community at places like Calvert Investment or Trillium or my pension funds, where every day 10,000 clicks are redistributing wealth to more efficient companies like Toyota or Train. And that adjustment of capitalism is the social good. All right. So it's almost like an invisible Robin Hood. It's not Robin Hood. It's instead the merry pranksters exist in capitalism, and they're beginning to click the change. So my book is a reflection about that hope and that optimism in a time where it is easier for people to despair.
Yeah, it's very easy for people to go down the negative rabbit hole. If you look for it, you're going to find it. But working with organizations like you have, you know, okay, these are the ones that are they're going to ignore the naysayers. They've got their mission. They know what they want to do. They know what they want to accomplish. They may not necessarily know yet how they're going to do it, but that doesn't bother them. They know that they'll have the creative willpower to be able to attack it and do the things that they want to do and make that impact on the world, both from a financial standpoint, but also a social good. And we've, highlighted this throughout the conversation. Both of those can coexist. They're not an either or, but I think sometimes people try to pigeonhole them as an either or, and they're not. And the more that we recognize that yes, your organization can actually be more profitable if you do things in a way that benefits humanity and social good and all of that, you'll find efficiencies. I'm a big fan of efficiencies. Believe me, if you can do it in 2 steps and still give out the great quality, by all means, because that frees you up to do other things that could make impact as well. So it makes a ton of sense.
I would like to learn a little bit more before we leave about your breakfast leadership network, because I'm
Yeah.
happy to be on it. So can you tell me a little bit about who you're reaching?
Yeah, of course. Our organization, we launched it. Actually, the website was registered 8 years ago on Monday, so it's been around a bit. And the initial premise of the organization was I was working with organizations and C-suite executives on burnout recovery and prevention because I had my own
I
burnout
noticed that,
journey.
yeah.
Yeah, I had a pretty bad case of burnout 15 years ago, and cost me nearly everything, including my life. And after
Boy,
recovering from all of that, I determined, well, I don't want to do that again. So what do I need to do? So I started researching burnout and went down that rabbit hole. And this was, 2011, 2012, when I still, I was, diving into it. And it started as I got more aware to it, I noticed a lot of my peers, and I was working in the healthcare industry at the time, were going down the same road that I did, and it scared the crap out of me. So I thought, okay, what can I do about this? So started writing about it, started talking about it. One thing led to another, started doing keynotes, writing books, doing consulting. You launched the podcast show a little over 7 years ago to talk about that, and then just bring awareness to entrepreneurs and small business owners,
good for you.
across the globe to, share that yes, you can build a great organization. Yes, you can run a great organization, but you don't need to burn out doing it. You just have to
Well, more power
understand.
to you, because I do think that that's an important lived experience to share.
Yeah,
And good for your work on the website. One of the things I hope you do is Rob Nyson, my publicist who put me in touch with you, is a very classical, wonderful ex-publisher of a Big Ten firm. He doesn't share your contact information. It's his style to preserve the relationship to you. So if you emailed me your mailing address, I'd love to send you 2 or 3 of my books for your home library so that
That'd
I
be
can
awesome.
become sort of like a brain trust for you.
Yeah.
Because I've now that I'm retired, it took me 17 years to finish this, but a publisher came out with a book about my life, but I could tell it fits your sensibility because I chose not to write about myself, but the 77 short vignettes are about the people who shaped me. Because you've used the key words that I'm very interested in: curiosity, creative, and cooperation, right? So, if you think about it, I'd love to send you that in case you want to do another follow-up. The book came out a month ago,
Yeah.
so it's still getting its legs.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I'll definitely after the show, I'll email you all that contact information, and I highly encourage people to, if they haven't already, pick up your books and follow your content, and because the expertise and experiences you have provide such a foundation for organizations to really thrive and grow and survive. And the stat, when you look at the Fortune 500, I saw this the other day, and it was surprising but not that almost half of the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 have either been acquired or they're gone. And
Isn't
you're
that
like,
fascinating?
it's like, you go, how in the world? Or even I saw a story the other day, one of the organizations in San Diego where I spent a bunch of time as well, called Q Health. They were valued during the pandemic, over $2 billion. They've shut up shop. They're closed. They're gone. Like from 2.3 billion to nothing in a couple of years. It's because market changes. There was all kinds of other things that fell into place that created the situations that they were facing. But you can be top of the world and you can be underwater in a blink of an eye, and it's
Take for example, Enron in their own lifetime. I remember I used to go down to Enron because there were utilities that my firm was working for that wanted to use them as a model. And luckily, the lawyer and I that would go down came back and said, there's something that doesn't smell right there. So you just made the key point that even the global 500 changed. So in my books, I try and emphasize the lasting set of competitive principles that allow them to continue to innovate. Take, for example, Unilever. There are really 300 different small railroad trains on the same road. They're managed by the same vision and set of people, the most legendary one, Paul Pullman, but I've met many Unilever people. But each car is given a huge amount of innovative, creative freedom. So they buy Ben and Jerry's ice cream, but they have the capability of bringing it to Africa and Australia. And the formula doesn't change of the product or the vision. It's all attached to this huge, that's what the Lever brothers called the Unilever train. And I think there's a real genius to that, allowing innovation within the small units as opposed to homogenizing it all at the top. There's many different models of management success. And as you just mentioned, many examples of management failure, which is what kept my life so interesting, Michael.
I bet. So I'll definitely have all your contact information in the show notes. So Bruce, really, really appreciate your time today and love this conversation. We could probably talk for 10 hours straight on this stuff because it's one of the things that drives it home for me is I want organizations to just crush it and be really well because it benefits all of us when they do. And it's I love celebrating companies and individuals and teams like yours that just help these organizations do what's right, and make things better for all of us because we all win when that happens. So again, Bruce, thank you so much for being on
I'm
the show.
delighted to be part of your Breakfast Leadership Network. Thank you for your time, Michael.